and welcome to Campaign Chronicles. With just 23 weeks to go until the first round of voting, this is France 24's regular update on what's happening ahead of the French presidential election. Coming up in today's programme, nuclear power, a showstopper in talks on the left, a blast from the past ruffles socialist feathers, and who would have thought it, raising taxes becomes a campaign promise. We begin, though, with a roundup of the week's news from the political coalface, and the big parties are already gearing themselves up for battle.
The end of the affair or an acrimonious divorce. Negotiations between the Socialist Party and the Greens are at a standstill, and with a deadline for a deal looming, it's time for recriminations and ultimatums.
If François Hollande refuses to stop the next generation of nuclear reactors, there's no deal.
The Socialist candidate, though, says he won't negotiate under duress. That stalemate saw the Greens' leadership backtrack and insist Eva Joly's outburst wasn't definitive. And with their poll figures faltering, the environmentalists have little leverage. A sign of things to come in the National Assembly.
De vous accrocher à des vieilles lunes socialistes qui vous ont certes conduit par effraction au pouvoir en 97 et vous n'avez rien fait.
Strong words, and Finance Minister François Baroin's outburst provoked an outraged reaction from Socialist MPs.
La séance est suspendue.
The first suspension since 2006. While Baroin himself admitted he may have stepped out of line, the 2012 battle lines are being drawn, even if the candidates themselves are keeping their powder dry. Never the shrinking violet, Arnaud Montebourg is back in the spotlight. The young Turk from the Socialist Party has a novel way of breathing new life into Parliament. Ban MPs over the age of 67. Brushed aside by the party hierarchy, the debate has already lurched into age-related jibes.
He told me he was 49, so I said I myself was Prime Minister at the age of 37, so you're already behind schedule.
They were elected to the National Assembly when I left high school. Next year, I'll be 50.
The much-vaunted united front of the Socialist primary, then, already seems like little more than a distant memory.
Next up, his name may not ring a bell, but to many socialists, Jean-Pierre Chevènement is the stuff of nightmares. He's the man behind one of France's biggest political upsets back in 2002. But now the leader of the tiny Citizens of the Republic Party has a unique position and thinks his ideas have never been more attractive thanks to the Eurozone crisis.
Is this man the French Socialist Party's worst nightmare? Once upon a time, he was. At 72 years of age and less than a week into his third presidential race, Jean-Pierre Chevènement may be no spring chicken, but he certainly knows how to win round potential voters.
Et on a besoin de vous. Il faudrait que les Français le sachent et que la gauche, qui est la grande famille à laquelle j'appartiens, comprenne mieux cela, c'est-à-dire la nécessité d'encourager les chaînes d'entreprise.
This factory produces hardened metal tools, an appropriate choice. Chevènement's 4 decades in politics have forged his vision. He says the Eurozone crisis has vindicated his Euroscepticism, and his promise to defend French industry taps into the frustration many workers feel with the status quo.
I think the politicians should make sure people can live decently. That's all I'm asking for. If that's in his programme, I'll vote Jean-Pierre Chevènement.
But with his poll numbers barely registering, he is still a marginal figure. So why the fear factor for the Socialist Party? For one big reason, he brings back bad memories. In 2002, the Socialists' presidential candidate was beaten in the first round by the far-right Front National. Lionel Jospin's poll lead, whittled down as 7 other left-wing candidates diluted the votes, prime amongst them Jean-Pierre Chevènement. This time, many socialists hope he can be made to see sense.
His decision isn't reasonable, given the size of what's at stake in the 2012 presidential election.
With every extra candidate, that could constitute a risk.
But for the ruling UMP party, the prospect of the left shooting itself in the foot again is not to be discouraged.
If the rest of the left was made of the same patriotic and Republican stuff as him, this country would be better off.
Jean-Pierre Chevènement is a grown-up. He knows what he has to do. If he thinks he should run, then he's free to do that.
Chevènement himself insists the threat of a repeat of 2002 is blown out of proportion.
As soon as I explain the basic problems, they say, they take out the debate extinguisher so that people hear nothing else. In 2002, I said things that were correct. My only wrong was to be right too soon.
Too soon or too late. Caught between the left and the right, Jean-Pierre Chevènement has always been something of a political paradox. Now with his ideas in vogue again and adopted by many more prominent rivals, the irony is Chevènement himself may be left behind.
Well, I'm joined now by our political reporter, Luke Brown. Welcome to the programme, Luke. Chevènement, as we saw there, is a marginal figure, but he's back in the headlines this week.
He certainly was, and it wasn't for the reasons that you would expect his political stance. He was actually in the top 10 last Saturday of the global Twitter trends. It was not for reasons political around his candidacy. Rather, a hashtag was created which was called Replace a Word from a Film with Chevènement. That did the rounds around the world, resulted in quite a few big names, including from the French political sphere, contributing. It is worth knowing that he actually walked out of 3 different governments. He was in a coma back in the late 1990s, so some pretty appropriate ones there. Chevènement never dies, 3 weddings and a Chevènement, or no country for old Chevènement. So a bit of creativity around the world there.
All right. Well, it's regarded as a big no-no of political campaigning, but it's something that leading figures simply can't avoid. What are we talking about here?
We're talking about austerity and tax hikes. Usually you would not see them in a pre-campaign era, thanks to the Eurozone crisis, a little avoiding them. But the 2 figures are basically trying to nuance their stances. For example, François Hollande, he's been on TV twice in the past week, basically trying to lay out the fact that the austerity measures announced earlier in the week, they're a bit regressive. They're going to be worse off for households, especially if they're VAT taxes. For quite a lot of the past couple of weeks, he is being criticised on the right, however, for not really making any constructive comments. That's why he's going to be setting out his team next week. He does say his programme is not going to be unveiled until early next year. In the meantime, he is basically attacking the record of President Nicolas Sarkozy. He says that record speaks for itself in a bad way. Let's take a listen.
Nicolas Sarkozy is the French president. He hasn't just come to power. Since the summer, we've been getting the impression he's only just been elected. It's as if there's a new president who says, well, look, it was very badly run before I came to power. I'm just finding out. I didn't know. I wasn't informed. And then he says, but now you're going to see, now it's going to be stability, austerity, truth.
All right, well, that's François Hollande. What about the president himself, Nicolas Sarkozy?
Well, he's really focusing on getting his troops to concentrate their fire and their criticism on Hollande's what he considers to be Hollande's 2 main weak spots. That's pensions reforms. He's fudged the issue so far, and also the socialist candidate's promise to create 60,000 jobs in the education sector. That's likely to be rather costly in the long term, and perhaps in the campaign itself. It is worth pointing out that Hollande's point that Sarkozy has changed tack. That is quite true. Gone is the hyper-president of the past. He is delegating a lot more. He's delegating perhaps the bad news. For example, getting his Prime Minister, François Fillon, to announce the austerity measures earlier this week. That, as well as his prominent role at the G20, did see him gain quite a few opinion poll points, between 5 and 8 points in various opinion polls this week. So he is still behind by about 15 points, but he is narrowing the gap on François Hollande.
All right, thank you very much indeed to Luke Brown. Well, it's time now for our weekly look at some of the 44 million people who will likely be voting come April. We'll be touring France to find out what the nation's hopes and fears are. This week, one of the big target groups from the last presidential election, young entrepreneurs.
Oui, Sébastien. C'est Alexandre. Là, j'arrive au bureau dans 10 minutes. Juste vérifie que la newsletter est bien prête. Tu la mets sur mon bureau.
Alexandre is on the go from morning till night. Even though he's only 27, he's already a CEO.
Bienvenue dans mes locaux.
Welcome to my office. That is ilou.com. The idea is that you can rent or advertise for rental any kind of items. Here is a camera that can be rented for €3 a day. And here an evening dress that can be rented out for €9 a day.
Elu.com is now a well-established business, although it came to life by chance, as Alexandre was looking for a drill.
My neighbour lent us a drill and laughed, saying, "What if I rented it to you?" For him, that was a joke. For us, it was the beginning of the story.
A graduate from France's top business school, Alexandre set up the company with his partner Benoit. 2 years and 500,000 euros later, Elu now has 11 employees, tens of thousands of users, and offers for rent some 120,000 items. He finances his company with a 15% commission on every transaction.
We believe this type of consumption, which is a sharing-orientated economy, a collaborative consumption, might be one of the solutions to get out of the economic crisis. Local and national authorities, as well as politicians, should back this type of concept.
Alexandre has spent his whole life here in Paris. He loves this city, but his heart also beats for Israel, his parents' homeland. He represents Israel in fencing competitions and hopes to qualify for London Olympics next year and practices every day.
You have to handle adversity, stress and competition, which is very useful in my business life because I deal with competitors every day.
Alexandre is not your everyday young Frenchman. In his eyes, his generation should be a priority.
I believe that the biggest problem in France today, notably among young people, is unemployment. On one hand, there are many candidates, and on the other, there are those who do not bother applying for jobs. So I think we should be tougher against those who abuse the system and help more those who really are trying to find a job.
Alexandre is a winner. His opponents are very quickly made aware of his incredibly competitive spirit.
Well, that's it for this edition of Campaign Chronicles. More to come next week, but do stay with us here on France 24 News Headlines coming up shortly. Bye-bye.